evening.
Good evening.
Calling to order the February 16th meeting of the Newton School Committee to interview Superintendent Finalist Candidate, Mr. Thomas Anderson. Welcome to the members of the public who are in person for this interview. I'm going to ask the members of the public to please silence your cell phones, refrain from outbursts, disruptions, or even applause, and please maintain order throughout the interview. Thank you. Mr. Anderson is currently the superintendent of the New Bedford Public Schools. He believes that learning must be viewed as a reciprocal lifelong journey, and he has worked in the field of education for over 25 years, with the past 8 as superintendent. Welcome, Mr. Anderson. We are grateful for your interest in our district, and we thank you for spending the entire day here in Newton, meeting our faculty and staff, touring several of our amazing schools, enjoying a luncheon with myself and the mayor, participating in a community forum, and now interviewing before the school committee in a bid to become Newton's next superintendent and leader of the Newton Public Schools. So, the first part of your interview will be a presentation of your 90-day entry plan based on what you've learned about the strengths, the challenges, and the opportunities of the Newton School District. You will have up to 20 minutes to share your presentation with us, and by previous agreement, questions on your presentation will hold until the final part of your interview. Mr. Anderson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I definitely appreciate the time to be here with you. And there you go. Thank you. I was wondering where that part was. So I know we will get right to this piece of it. So for the entry plan, it was interesting in being able to go through this again. And I was viewing it as it's actually what I do beyond the 90 days. So when I was thinking of what activities to put in there and really looking at it, there are things that I constantly do every day anyway. So just going through it. So this piece here, so from a 1,000-foot global perspective is how I view, we need to have a clear understanding of what happens and how we're all interconnected. The unique individual thoughts and feelings that we need to be exposed to, really understanding, we talk about understanding the trees and the entire, each tree in the forest. That's how I view what it is that we need to do. So from just the presentation, we'll do an introduction. I'll share a little bit about me and what makes me drive, what are the drivers and those types of things, and then get into the superintendent entry plan goals. But with that, that's what leads up to that point. So when I'm thinking about, so the theory of action, and I know we've all had this. I'm not going to go through and read each of the slides. And plus I know we have 20 minutes. So I want to make sure I get through all of them, but just highlighting, and we think about, if we align all assets, practices and policies, and as we go down and see, then we'll motivate all students to maximize their talents, to be excellent academically and thrive socially. I think when we're talking about who we want as our students and what we want them to become, all of the pieces need to contribute to the equity and having that institutional voice that we want for our students. The presentation, so the purpose of it is to compile a thorough summary of my findings, solicit a comprehensive list of suggestions from the community, collect strategies, and then poise the district. So that way I want people to be energized about what we're going to be doing, not just for 90 days, but for beyond that. From a core value, my inherent belief is that all people, no matter their background, their learning style, have the opportunity to exceed, to excel, and really tapping into their ability to build upon those skills and affording everyone the opportunity. So I know we'll get into a little bit later as far as when we think of equity and excellence, but this is where it starts from this core value. Having these different buckets, and that's what I wanted to mention here as far as access and equity. So as I go through the goals, we see this is what I have in mind when I'm meeting with individuals, meeting with organizations, building those relationships, because this is where we are and this is how we need to be connected. So my why is how we're grounded in our own families. And my daughter Layla, who's 17, who's a senior in high school, my wife here, our twin boys, Hunter and Bryce, who are college seniors. All of them are athletes, being able to balance and navigate what we do for extracurriculars, how we take care of our academics. So when we think of excellence, I practice it at home when we're really working to create an environment that's going to sustain them. And one thing I want to mention, because we talk about equity and someone said, well, think about your family. How do we do equity with someone needs more and someone needs this? And how do we have the variance and making sure that everyone has access and opportunity to be successful? So to get to the highlights, again, just sharing a few things in terms of advocacy, having an opportunity as I would represent Newton at different tables. So being the co-chair of the Urban Superintendents Network and having more access to know what's coming out on the front line from DESE and some of the other agencies and sort of what the changes are coming. We're talking a lot about the accountability measures that the board will either they're voting with or they're questioning at this point what the commissioner will be putting out as we go forward based on recovery and those type of things for MCAS and moving forward on there. So what is our mindset? So again, we really do not see through our eyes or hear through our ears, but through our beliefs. So again, compiling the information, really taking the time to learn what the hopes and dreams of our individual students are, what our parents are looking for, what our community members want us to be able to do for the city itself and creating productive members. This is something that is practiced, I practice all the time in terms of we need to learn as much as possible. I feel like I always can learn more. There's always a strategy that we need to put out there to figure out how can we do a better job at what's going on. Identify our strengths, open lines of communication, and assess development and implementation. So again, you listen, you learn, you share, you build, you plan, and that's that ongoing cycle. When I made the comment before about what it is that we continuously do, to me, that's what we need to do every year ongoing to ensure that we're assessing the right things, seeing what's most impactful versus just what we think that may be important at that time. So again, with the plan, creating an intentional process of the transition to really allow individuals to know what exactly will be taking place, have a comprehensive view, for me to have a comprehensive view of the entire community and getting a better understanding of what our strengths are and what our areas of growth that have already been identified or things that we do identify from the various meetings that we'll have. And just another point on here. So the entry plan is intended to develop an understanding of the school system and provide a foundation on which to base future goals. So we know there's a strategic plan already in place. So it's how do we implement that and carry forward and keep that mission going. So just the timeline itself, breaking it out in just 30-day increments. I would start before day one, obviously, in terms of the thought process and making some of those connections, but just being on paper in terms of what we're looking for from a timeline. Newton Public Schools, I thought it was good to add this in here because I view these documents as it's a public document. It's something I want to be able to, it needs to stand on its own. So when someone goes back and look at it, they can see, okay, we're aligned and we are, again, aligned to the core values that already exist. And as you continue to build off that, you can see it in the meetings and in the discussions that we have. It's always interesting to make sure that our community and our school community remembers, when I say connectedness, who we are as a school system. So I routinely will just include this information in here as data, just as a reminder for demographics and student enrollment information as we go through that. So the next set of slides, when we think of what is our unique competitive advantage as a school system, the pride that we have in Newton Public Schools, well, what do we think when we see these other brands? There's always lots of choices. So again, when we come back and we look and see, well, what does Newton Public Schools stand for? Again, what is our unique competitive advantage? Students that go on to the most competitive, highly competitive colleges and universities across the country. We have a very diverse community that is engaged and thoroughly in the school system. And I think when we think about what is our brand, that's what needs to come to mind. So the goals of the entry plan. So again, the first is to cultivate positive relationships, engage key stakeholders, As always, we have to review technology. We had some questions earlier just in terms of how do I view technology fitting into the educational landscape that we've navigated over the last 3 years, and we're still navigating in some ways. Review student programs, assess current data and evaluate programs, maintain professional, personal life balance. That's a new one for me that I put in there. I was talking to some colleagues who've been doing this job for much longer than I have, and they talk about the balance of life and how do you maintain other things so you can continue to do a good job in your job. So the first goal, just highlighting conducting the individual school committee meetings with members. We're partners. That's how I view it, as far as I will interact and connect with each one of you individually to get an understanding of what your priorities are, what your goals and objectives are, fully knowing that it is a collective body, but the body is made up of individuals who are truly invested and have their own thoughts about how certain things should happen. Another one, establishing clear, a clear understanding of roles and responsibilities. Again, it's just building that relationship. So I have an understanding of what the expectations are when you're interacting with staff, interacting with parents, interacting with students. So I know what direction in terms of, from a communication, how we can work that out. And again, just establish clear lines of communication. I've been doing a weekly note to my board currently, and even when I was a principal. And I'll give credit because as an assistant principal, I stole it from the principal. So when I became a principal, I started using it where I'd send a message to my community superintendent to say, I know you're busy. Here are some of the highlights of the school. These are the things we're doing. I want you to be able to articulate what we have. I've carried that forward. So for the board, for communication, it's not to be micromanaged. It's to say, you're very busy in the jobs that you have already in your regular day. I don't want to make it any more challenging. I want to equip you with necessary information or areas that you can reach back out and say, we need a little more information on that. Getting to goal 2, I believe in reaching out to everyone. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer in different formats. We have the access of technology now, which is a huge benefit the way we're doing it this evening. But for example, I have meetings with students 3 or 4 times a month. We'll have lunch. And I'll go to the building, I'll walk around with the principal for a little while, have lunch with the students. And it's kind of like how it happened today. And, there were some amazing conversations with a few students. I won't say names or schools, but we were blessed with just the level of understanding and engagement and just awareness of their surroundings. So we should be proud of that. Survey the faculty and staff. Again, things that we've continued to do during COVID, it necessitated a reason to do a little bit more of that, to really see what the staff, what their needs were, but then what were they doing in terms of struggling as human beings, and really digging a little bit deeper to see, well, what are your needs and how can we work together to be able to support that? Meeting various union leaders, we have to have a good relationship. I mean, I have to agree on everything, but we need to be respectful to one another, figure out what is it that we're planning for the future. So I meet with our union representation now and again to try to partner. And sometimes it's to brainstorm different ideas. It may have nothing to do with a contract, because that's not the only time we're supposed to have that dialogue and really be open about it. We're planning for the school system. We're planning to make, and it's not even about changes. So if we're just thinking about the International Baccalaureate program that we're bringing in, letting him know, so when the members are asking different questions, he understands where the staffing is coming from. Well, the staffing is already built in. It's not an add-on to the budget in this way. The students are already there. So just having some of those ideas. So from an academic standpoint, they're fully aware and fully engaged. And what's one last point on here? So engagement of community leaders. So one thing I do now, I routinely meet with, we have an interfaith clergy. So I meet with Reverend Lima just in general, and we'll talk about the needs that we have. They're experts in counseling and providing other mental health supports to other organizations. So sometimes they'll meet with principals and be able to work some of those things out as well. Goal 3. So again, reviewing all the systems, and these are all the things all the areas where they're not always the most exciting, but if they don't work, everybody knows. So we really having a clear sense of what's happening with transportation and building services, and especially when we talk about technology, what's happening with our facilities. If the boiler's not working the boiler's not working when it was -6 degrees 2 Saturdays ago, we're going to have a problem. And so where are we just being proactive and having an understanding about it? I'm sure those things are in place. That's where for me, it's let me get an understanding of where we are with it. Request a special program. Request an analysis of the technology department. So again, we'll look at that, and then reviewing all the infrastructure for technology services. We know that firewalls have increased. There are areas where staff, teachers aren't able to get to certain websites to conduct lessons and those type of things because we've become so dependent on it. Or again, what are those forward conversations to really talk to our tech people to see, is that something we can support? What's not so much the challenge, but what's the risk of opening up to do those things? So again, it's just having that level of conversation.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we're approaching 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, good. And here, review all student performance data. Again, that's just all the data that exists, whether it's AP scores, SAT scores, PSAT, all the information there. Program analysis, again, all student programming. This one I just want to touch on. As you think about student programming, some of it is grant funded. So where are we with that each year, making sure we're evaluating what we need to do with it and what we can support. On 5, again, is reviewing all key documents, organizational charts, handbooks, key financial and personnel data. That goes without saying. On 6, this is one, like I said, I added just in terms of maintaining a healthy work-life balance. It makes people at home happy, and that makes the life go a little smoother. Restating the goals, and just a summary of some of the items in terms of the transition plan. Again, assessing the assets and the strengths, the opportunities for growth, creating ideas for sustaining, a rich record of success. And I mentioned you all in terms of cultivating that relationship, making sure it's positive, and we're able to work through and seeing that we're going in the same direction. And just upon completion of the 90 days, there are other areas that I continue to focus on. So when I look at listen to learn, it's not something that I just say. It's part of what I do, not just now, but just as all the years I've been an administrator. You have to listen first, assess what's going on to really be able to make any changes. Share, to prepare, plan to build was in the diagram that I shared. Here, just really quickly, we think of the equity commitment all around. These are all the components that go with it. So it's not in isolation, it's into support to make sure when we're trying to focus on excellence and having that balance. The buckets, again, I use this sometimes just as a visual, as a reminder. These are all the areas that we're responsible for. So the desired outcomes, the summary of findings, an outline of the process, and again, a community that is excited and engaged. So here are just a list of, it's not as comprehensive, but just a list of examples of the meetings and individuals that I will be meeting with that I have done in the past. And again, the document review. And this is a little repetitive, but just getting to the end and just saying, this is what we're going to have in the end as far as a document demonstrating what our strengths are, what direction we're going, and how we're going to continue to move forward. In that process, I think it's worth the repetition of the listen and learn, because sometimes we say we're going to listen and we haven't really listened thoroughly. How are we engaged with the listening part? And again, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate having that very thorough 90-day entry plan for us to consider. Again, we will entertain questions from the members about this portion of your interview in the last section.
Okay.
So in the next part of your interview, we will be asking, the school committee members will be asking questions that have been drafted during our question development meeting last week. We'd like to think of this as a conversation that we're engaging with you around the specific topics that are important to our group. Each school committee member will pose one question this round, and this section is scheduled for an hour, but you will have up to 6 minutes to respond to each question. Kathy Shields, our member from Ward 7, and the vice chair will ask the first question.
Good evening.
Good afternoon, or good evening. So my question is, how do you describe your management philosophy or style? What are your managerial strengths and weaknesses?
Good, thank you. So my managerial style is, we can use the term distributive, but it's based on relationships. So again, I say that because essential walking in. So for example, when I became superintendent in New Bedford, the focus was to go in, build relationships with individuals. We can see an organizational chart. We know who reports to whom, but how do we build those relationships before we assume that anything is not happening or things are happening? And so when I think about the strength part of that is being able to make those connections. So for example, our meetings are structured where there's a timekeeper, a facilitator, and a note taker. I'm an item on these on our leadership meeting agendas. I have the time that I need to say, kind of connect us together. But what that does, it allows for me and now others, as we've been doing this, to empower individuals who don't always speak, who have these great ideas, and I can see it. And when we meet one-on-one, it comes out, but I'm thinking I need it to come out in our team. So that's one area to allow them that time and space. So sometimes I manipulate it a little bit and I will decide who the facilitator is going to be, because it puts them in a role where then they have to share. And there's a little bit of discomfort in that. But if we're investing in our team to cultivate them to be this great team, we have to push a little bit and make sure that we're positioning the individuals to be in that position to share what it is that they know. So I would say that part is the strength in terms of the relationship piece of it. And the other and aligned with it is, there's the accountability. We work where we have to be accountable to one another. We're accountable to our students, we're accountable to our families. That's first. And being clear that has to be our objective all the time, making sure we're student-centered, but understanding how do those decisions that we're making in the best interest of students impact the adults that have to enact them and live through. So being very clear on those goals and objectives, and it's repeated. So when we have these meetings and we're digging deeper into having those conversations, where I would go around, and my expectation, even if I'm not running the meeting, is that everyone's had an opportunity to share on the topic. And we've covered, right now we're all, we'll talk later, I'm sure, but we're talking, as it's budget season all the time. So whether it's a challenging conversation, it's a conversation that has to be had when we're talking about evaluating our programs. So from a leadership standpoint, is every department needs to contribute to those conversations. You might be the facilities director. I'm still asking for you to contribute to a conversation about curriculum, because the facility may dictate what we can do in certain buildings or in certain rooms. So again, it's one of those areas that we make sure that it's a complete engagement. There's a complete respect for someone's perspective.
Thank you,
Okay,
Kathy.
thank you.
Up next, we have the member from Ward 8, Cove Davis.
Hello.
What has been the most unpopular professional decision you have had to make, and how did you handle the reaction to this decision?
The most unpopular, let's see. There are, I guess, one thing that we've gone through, we had the narrative around police in schools. And it's hard to say that it was the most unpopular, the direction that we've gone into, but I think it was the most engaged. It had many perspectives and different viewpoints on what we should do. So during that time when school resource officers over the last couple of years the superintendents were given the opportunity to make the decision on whether we keep them in the buildings or we don't. So what I did initially, it was because of the conversations that happened around the killing of George Floyd. The narrative was much different, and it leaned directly on the side of, well, the officers need to come out of the buildings. What I elected to do was look at data first to see, well, how have the officers impacted what you're saying they've impacted in other places in New Bedford? So that was the first piece that we started looking at. We have conversations and good relationship with the chief of police. So we've always talked about different things. So we were kind of engaged with that piece of it. The next step was to convene a year-long study with community members, including current students, NAACP members, other local organizations, other advocates with all different perspectives. And it was arranged so that way we had multiple perspectives on whether they should stay in or whether they should be removed. So there were meetings throughout the year, about 4 or 5 meetings throughout the year, looking at data, pulling speakers in from other parts of the country. One of the meetings, there was someone who came in from Chicago, sharing how things work there and getting a clearer picture of what the officers did in the buildings during that time. I was in Chicago for a couple of years as part of my career, and it's a different structure. And I shared that because the police in the buildings there were helping to police. We didn't need police to police our buildings. And that was even staying objective and central about it. I shared that thought as the groups, as we continued to meet. I didn't meet with the groups. We had a facilitator and a note taker that would go back, do a recap, making sure all the community members that were there, we break them out into small groups. So that way we get a complete perspective of what was going on versus putting some individuals together and then their voice was louder than someone else's. So all of that behind the scenes is navigated to make sure we had a clear picture of it. So we did that for that entire year. And so this year, what we're doing, we're piloting. So we made some changes to the MOU. The MOU went from about 3.5, 4 pages to a longer document of about 12, 13, 14 pages that includes more about professional development, more of some of the other areas that were being questioned in some of the other places that were challenging whether the resource officers should stay in the buildings or not. But I always kept coming back to what is their impact in our city? And that was the driver to make sure that we were in a good place of understanding and respecting the different perspectives. So it wasn't popular on one side and it was on the other side. But I think with some of the changes, it made it where everyone could understand the level of importance of having the officers there. So when I said the most, but I think it was the most engaging, a very challenging process because it was very emotional. It's extremely sensitive, to this moment. So I think from a community standpoint, really being able to pull people together and have that discussion in a productive way, for all those months really helped out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cove. Up next, we have a question from our member from Ward 2, Chris Bresky.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Hey, how are you?
Please describe the balance between an organization being driven by its ideals and being driven by outcomes. How do you create a strategic plan addressing this, and how do you evaluate its efficacy?
Thank you. So when we think of ideals, I'll start there. I can say what are our expectations of the educational system? What are the hopes and dreams individually that we have for our own children? What are the values that we have? If we think of an outcome would be my student getting into X school, that's fine. So we're clear on what the values are, what the hopes and dreams in that situation. So that would be what I would consider as far as the ideal. And then the outcome of getting there. But along the way, we have to have that process. So if I speak to, we understand what AP classes are. So students taking advanced placement classes, we know the number of participation. We know the scores that will have access in terms of college credit. What is our target? Is there a target? What is our goal for students and how well they're doing in there? That's one piece. What is the access to those courses? What are we providing students who are going to go in and do the work and they may struggle a little bit because their background is not as strong in a particular area. What are we providing for them to ensure that they can maximize their level to be able to compete? Not taking from any of our other students because they're there. We're going to keep pushing them. I've always believed that, especially as a principal, you're going to keep pushing those students up that are already excelling, and we're going to keep pulling the other students up who need a little bit more support. So when we balance out what's in our strategic plan, and because I get it, sometimes if there's not enough numbers and we talk about anecdotal data, it's a little bit harder to see. It's a little bit more cloudy. But giving that example for AP scores, that's pretty clear. It's what do we want our participation rate to be? What's the level of success that we want students to have when you're engaged in the class? The part that we have to be careful about is the access. And if we're going to keep students out, because if the more students that take it and they don't score at a high enough number, is that going to damage our brand? And I believe that, no, we can do both. If I look at how things have happened in New Bedford, where we've increased the number of students taking AP classes, the scores in some classes have dropped a little bit, but scores in other classes have gone up. And so there is that balance. And so looking to see if the outcome is to have them exposed to a high level curriculum and they're able to get into, 2 years ago, we had 3 students who got into Harvard University. They had their smallest acceptance rate ever, which gave some credence to the curriculum that they're engaging with, as far as the number of honors classes, the number of AP classes that are there. So that speaks to sticking to the curricular side. We also have added early college. We've added dual enrollment, which is giving college courses while they're in school. So that again addresses and allows more students to be acclimated to what it is to be in that environment after high school. So we know from an AP class, it's just the score, just that test at the end of the year. But then for early college and for the dual enrollment courses, students are engaging in that high level throughout. When I was a principal in Maryland, we did the same thing, and we maximized more students getting in. There were some students that needed a little bit more time, a little extra help. We were able to provide that for them, but it didn't impact those students that were already in there and being able to continue to push them up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Up next, we have a question from our school committee member from Ward 3, Anping Shen. Anping, please pull down your mic.
Thanks. Good evening, Mr. Anderson.
Good evening.
Thanks, Kami. My question is, what your vision to capitalize the increasingly diversified student population in Newton? Give you some example. 56% white students, 21% Asian students, 10% Hispanic Latino students, 5% African American Black students, and 8% multi-race non-Hispanic students. So again, what is your vision to capitalize the increasingly diversified student population to maintain, sustain, enhance the legacy of our district's educational excellence? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question. So if I think of Newton is a very diverse community. When we looked for places to live, and when my wife looked for places for us to live, when we came to Massachusetts from Maryland, Newton was a place that definitely that stood out for those reasons. And it enhances the community. It enhances the different perspectives that we have as human beings. So aside from the school system, we were looking at the city of Newton and what's there. And now the students who are in our schools, who live in the city, represent the different, we try to remind people that diversity it's not only about complexion. It's about different thoughts. It's about backgrounds and understanding and different languages, all those pieces that were in there. That is how we capitalize on taking advantage of that, having people share their different stories about their own experiences, taking advantage. I know there are lots of different events that happen now. It happens to be Black History Month. I've seen some things listed about some of the events that are taking place, and just in terms of sharing, historical figures and sharing just different stories of individuals from different backgrounds. We know that the calendar, I saw something where we were talking about modifying the calendar for Lunar New Year and those, but that whole discussion was getting others to understand why it's important, and so much about it being important, but what does it mean? And I believe that we have to take more time for us to explain our backgrounds, explain and look at from a historical context, not thinking that we're looking for something bad or something where it's people were mistreated. There are so many positives that we can lead off with. And we have to have a conversation that is open. We cannot have a conversation where we come at it in a direction making someone feel bad, because then they're opting out of the discussion. I've been in meetings as part of the Racial Equity and Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the state for superintendents, and I hear some of the discussions. It's a small group, there's about 16 or 17, in hearing some of the discussions of colleagues of trying to have certain conversations across the state. But then we have to look and think of, well, how are you opening that dialogue? If you're opening the dialogue and saying, well, you're not doing this and you're not doing that, that's really not going to be helpful. If we're opening the dialogue and we're looking at our data, like you shared, these numbers represent who we are as a community. Well, what do each of these communities bring to the table? What is the added value? Everyone has, and everyone has a value add. Let's be specific about that, and not to say it's to overshadow one group or the other. We all live here together. We're one large community. How can that be reflected so that way it doesn't seem like it's a push and pull. It's really given the opportunity and the time and the space to celebrate everyone, and not at the cost of somebody else. And I've always believed that's how, that's how I was raised, that's how I was taught. I've shared before, my father worked in a factory. He worked with people from all backgrounds, and he did that for 40 plus years. So we were exposed to individuals from many, many different places. And you always learned about someone's food, someone's holiday. That's just how it was. We just grew up expecting that's how people interacted and people engaged. And I've always carried that through. And in my own house, that's kind of how we live by. Thank you.
Thanks, Anping. Up next, we have a question from our member from Ward 6, Paul Levy, who's joining us remotely.
Thank you, Tamika, and welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Good evening.
How would you go about helping the community reach a broadly shared and clearly articulated commitment toward both equity and excellence for Newton? Please provide examples from your previous positions where you were personally involved in helping a community work through these kinds of difficult issues.
Good, thank you. So I guess one example I can use is when I was principal in Maryland. So when I was at John F. Kennedy High School, we had a signature program called, it's an interesting name, Leadership Training Institute. But the program was put in the building in the late 80s to ensure that the population of the community was changing. And they wanted to make sure that they had something that would attract the population that was currently living there. The population is becoming increasingly, Black and brown, and much more diverse, much more comprehensive in terms of different languages, which we should view as a positive as far as how that happened. And by the time I got to the school, the population of students that were in the program, as they are now, were basically 90% of color. And those students, the outcomes of the program that people thought were going to change actually increased. So in that LTI program, we had more students that were going to nationally known universities as far as being highly competitive, all the Ivy schools that were included in there. What I needed to do was ensure that I was articulating the strength of the program, articulating that the AP classes that students were taking, the community service hours that they had to earn, the leadership projects that they were doing. Students would invite in, since we were close to DC, students would invite in members of the different embassies, which some of them it represented some of their home countries. They'd come in and they would do different events and speaking. They did a women's conference at one of the years where they invited many of the ambassadors to come in, and they came. Students were able to, they led the events from start to finish. So use that as an example because the excellence piece of that did not change. There was no sacrifice in terms of that program starting one way and evolving into something else years later. It was more inclusive. It represented, the school has about 60 different countries and about 80 different languages and dialects in that area of Silver Spring where it is. So that really allowed us to take advantage, to Mr. Chen's previous question, really allowed us to take advantage and maximize the strength of diversity, if you want to call it. And so when we're talking about that excellence piece and being able to maintain it, we didn't lower the standards. AP is a national curriculum. That helped because we didn't change what it was there. The community service hours and the relationships that they built with the local businesses and other organizations, that didn't change, that got stronger. So we're able to live through that process. And if I think about where some of the things we do right now in New Bedford, it's the same thing, being able to add in early college and the International Baccalaureate program, adding a magnet program that'll be coming in, and seeing the different students in the colleges and universities that they're still being accepted into is a clear indicator that, you know, we're not there yet, but we're getting closer, and we haven't sacrificed the fidelity of what we view as excellence. And again, having where we're all on the same page about what does excellence mean? What is that data point, if we have to attach a number to it, that we have to come up with? So I think that might be something as we go forward and we look to see, well, how is excellence measured? We know different individuals have a different perspective on it, which is great. And so we just need to come to the table and think, okay, well, how do we best measure it? How is it best reflected? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Up next, we have a question from me. Again, I'm Tamika Olszewski. I'm the member from Ward 4. And my question for you is, at the end of your first year, how would NPS faculty and staff describe the culture you have created?
Very good. So at the end of my first year, I would believe that they would say, we've continued, we've strengthened a very welcoming culture, being very personable. So for example, when I go visit schools, we don't go into offices. We may go in there for a minute, then we walk around. I believe that we need to see classroom instruction. I'm not coming in as a superintendent to evaluate classroom instruction per se. I'm walking with the principal. We're discussing, we're seeing, there's a level of visibility, and as small and minimal as it is sometimes when I think about it, people will respond back and say they thought it was important that the superintendent, not Thomas Anderson, but the superintendent thought enough to come into their room and see what's going on. I've had teachers, when especially in some of the elementary schools, and students will ask, well, what are they doing here? And the teacher will say, well, they're coming to see if you're learning as much as you're supposed to be learning, or they're coming to see how they can support you getting more of something else, and continuing with that style of doing it. And even when we're walking around today, I don't want to be the first person going into the room. I said, you're the principal. I want you to go into the room first. You're who they want to see. You're who they recognize. We go in. And that's just how I am. I think just having that level of respect, because going to our principal's buildings, we know that the buildings belong to us. We know on paper what things say, but going into that building and looking at staff, they need to see the principal coming into that room first. They need to, and I say they being staff and students, to know this is who the person that's most important. I'm going to be supportive always. Doesn't mean that we're going to agree, and it doesn't mean that there's not going to be a conversation about what we could have done differently, but I'm going to make sure that they feel supported. It's a welcoming environment. So when we talk about retention at the end of the year, we know that people retire and sometimes they move, but we want to make sure that the retention stays high and increases because they feel as though, you know, they had that sense of belonging. And one other piece about it is when I talk to some of the students, we talk about their voice in the process, their voice in terms of having having a voice where it's, you know, we could talk about institutional belonging. Do you really have a voice in changing a policy? Are we bringing you to the table? I know we have student members that sit in the committee, but I'm just thinking in general, having those kind of conversations with students where they know that we're approachable. And again, I have, you know, some of the conversations I had today, I mean, we had some great conversations. I'm going to be forced to name someone shortly, but it was that good. And it's encouraging and it's heartwarming to really feel that. And my family knows I'm kind of, my affect sometimes is here. So it was very, it was very good, very enlightening. So.
Thank you. Up next, we have a question from our school committee member from Ward 1, Rajiv Parsada.
Thank you for coming in. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Having spent the entire day meeting with the NPS team, the Newton community, what aspect of the superintendent role do you find most exciting, and what aspect do you find most daunting?
Thank you. The piece that's most exciting, it is getting into buildings. It is really having those conversations with everyone. I believe that you don't walk past anyone without speaking. And I'd given an example before as principal, I'm touring the building, popping into classrooms. And I remember this this particular day, there was a teacher and she was going to do copies and these things, and we passed each other twice. And I spoke every time, because the second time she kind of looked at me like, why are you saying hi again? And I'm just thinking, well, we're human beings in the hallway. we need to at least speak to each other. And I think that's something as human beings, we definitely need to do. And I think that is what is most exciting, most encouraging, but just the opportunity to continue to have influence and impact on lives going forward. I think the way Newton is structured, there's some great opportunities to continue the levels of advancement, different partnerships. I mean, all of those things there's this great foundation. That's exciting. Opportunities we have now to work with. There's a new relationship we have with the Museum of Science. And I may not be able to say too much, but I know they're looking to kind of help us do some partnering and those type of things, to work with students. So those areas, I look at it where there is no ceiling, there is no limit. And the minds that we have to cultivate, and especially from some of the conversations again today, because you're talking about elementary all the way through high school, the future is very, very bright. And that part is very exciting to be able to see. What's daunting or concerning is how we've all navigated, and we continue to navigate, the impacts of the pandemic. But what I've said to people before is that it exacerbated things that were already there. Some of us just didn't take them and prioritize them the way we could have. So when we think about the mental health services and we implement tiered interventions and tiered supports, well, those things, those aren't new. We focused on social awareness and decision-making and it's not new. That structure was already there. We needed to prioritize it more. We needed to take a few minutes and really engage students in the beginning, really dig into learning who they are as people when we get into our classes. And some of our teachers already do that, and it's a great thing. But we need to make sure that that's common practice. So there's no pressure to feel as though, we're going to get to those outcomes. We're still going to be successful. But we need to take a few minutes to pull you in, engage, and let you know that I care about you, because later, when things get really hard, you're going to feel that somebody cares about you and you're going to keep pushing forward. That's the piece that's daunting, that we need to ensure that we continue to do that, not minimizing it and not allowing it to be overshadowed by, something. To me, it's all academic. So it's not as though we're not going to teach calculus and we're going to focus on mindfulness activities. We can teach calculus and do mindfulness activities at the same time. So it's how are we mentally processing and doing some of those things. So there are some other ones, but I think that would be good for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajiv. Up next, we have a question from the Mayor of Newton, Ruth Ann Fuller.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
How will you deal with the financial challenges facing NPS?
Yes. Financial challenges are always in my mind in terms of how we view our budget. When I said before that it's always budget season, it's always time to evaluate our programming. How are we looking and planning for next year? So for example, one thing I've done, and we do it in New Bedford, we have a great and excellent finance team. Same here. I got to meet Liam earlier this morning. And so when we're looking at evaluating programming and planning for next year, what's the impact of those programs? Programs don't fix things, people do. So how are we investing in our people in terms of professional development for whatever that area is? So when we're thinking of whether it's a reading program at an elementary level, what are the outcomes that we're getting? And I won't say names because then it's commercialized because we pay for it. So thinking of what's the outcome that we're getting from that reading program? Did we fully staff it? Is it done with fidelity to ensure that teachers are equipped to be able to teach those reading strategies to our students? So you have that component of it, but then also looking to see from year to year, what are our contractual obligations? So if we know that within our contracts, there's a certain number that we have to make sure we understand we can't go too much over that, because having conversations, the way the process is, and we work with the chair and with the mayor and seeing, well, what is the revenue stream that's coming in? How much over, or where's the revenue stream first? What we need to compete for level service, what does that look like? So if we're saying 2.5% to make sure that we have enough to keep all of our staff and have level service, Okay, fine. But then what's our level of investment? So we need a 1% increase for investment to ensure that all the things we spelled out before, we can maintain that level and be able to do it. That's where the challenge is. So when we talk about a need to have versus a nice to have, we also want to recognize that there are certain things that we're used to. And we need to really dig into that to see, okay, we're used to that, but what's the impact? How is it being effective? Is it something we just do because we've always done it? And not to say, I mean, people will say that, well, don't just keep doing what you've always done, but no, for what's the data on it? From a financial investment, what do we have? From an academic investment, what can we show that, you know, the after school program that served, 500 students that we paid for out of our budget made a difference in math scores going up in 6th grade. So those are those areas that right now we continue to look at that. We have, I don't want to mention positions because it may make people nervous. So the thing is just looking at these positions that may have been added through ESSER funding. What's the impact? We're having that conversation right now. And when I go into, so part of that is seeing what that impact is. And then when I go into buildings and our teams go in, we're not specifically looking at that, but we're watching the entire academic scene. And so we get to see how those other positions or the program, the impacts that they're having on the total academic structure and force going forward. Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Fuller. Up next, we have a question from our member from Ward 5, Emily Printer.
Hi, good to see you again.
Same here. Thank you.
So please share with us examples of how you have implemented instructional strategies to improve educational outcomes for all students.
Thank you. So instructional strategies. First, again, from a data perspective. So we're always going to look at data. We're always going to disaggregate it by all student groups. We look at indicators along the way, whether it's attendance, behavioral. So for elementary, whether it's referrals or anything like that. So seeing what's happening with that and then going back to the root cause. So if we narrow it down, so I'll go back to being, easier example is, okay, as a principal, you have more control over it. So as a principal, you're getting a certain number of referrals from a particular teacher. We observe that class to see, okay, what are the instructional strategies? What's getting in the way of the lesson being delivered? So what we've done is we look at basic things as far as the level of engagement. What's the level of planning for a lesson that is there transition time? So for example, we go from one activity to the next and we realize, well, during that time is when things are kind of falling off a little bit. That gives opportunity for behaviors to, get a little bit off track. So in being able to support staff to identify that for them is just one simple area when we're talking about the level of engagement. Now, as we go in as a district team and we look at classrooms and really seeing what instructional strategies what instructional strategies are specifically being used, engagement always comes up. And again, it's having the professional development. We had a professional development, I believe, last week, and focusing on teaching students, focusing on English language learners. And in terms of language objectives, transitions, the use of vocabulary to make sure that they're fully engaged or fully understanding. But those are good strategies to use for all students. And so when they have their those are weekly meetings, we share more of it at monthly meetings with principals, but then in the buildings, when they have their planning time, the principal and their professional development individuals are able to go in working with staff to see, are we incorporating those specific strategies into our classrooms to ensure that if they're working for a population of students that need a little bit of that support, then they're going to work for all of our students. So really targeting how we're doing academic language, again, with vocabulary or the repetition of words, I saw some of that today where we're in a particular class and the word was mispronounced and the teacher stopped them, but it was very smooth. Students felt good about it. It was a great atmosphere in there. And she pronounced the word, it was just one syllable. And she did it again with another word. And those are those strategies in real time that you're able to see. She didn't have anyone identifying that for her. She was able to recognize it in the moment, realize the student needed to be able to get it right then before they left, and she was able to take care of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. So we have concluded that phase of your interview, and for the final phase, we will have, actually, we'll have a little bit more than 40 minutes. You did pretty well moving through that section. So during this third part, school committee members may ask for elaboration or clarification of previous responses, or ask a question relating to your earlier 90-day entry plan presentation.
Okay.
I will call on members by ward. Each member will have one follow-up question and will not be able to ask any two questions in a row out of fairness to everyone else. Questions should be clear and concise. If a member doesn't have a question, please say pass just to conserve time. Time permitting, I will allow additional questions. And Mr. Anderson, if you could tailor your responses to no more than 3 minutes, we will be able to get through more rounds that way.
Thank you.
All right, so up first, we will have Rajiv Parlikar from Ward 1.
Thank you.
So to follow up a little bit in terms of what you described as potentially the most daunting challenges, recovery from the pandemic across many aspects of our schools. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about your experience with dealing with special education students in your current role or previous roles, challenges they faced during the pandemic, and how you led efforts to help support them?
Good. Thank you. So regarding the pandemic, what we did with our students who had the highest needs, so we created so we had different groups that came in September. So we were all out for the pandemic. We're all out for through the summer. So we had our special education students with IEPs and our English language learners. We had them come in 4 days, I believe 4 days a week in the second week of September, as soon as we're able to bring students, being able to bring students back. So recognizing the needs that they had, we worked out transportation. We'd already had conversations with our bargaining units to understand these are the type of things that we need to be able to do. And so they were in school the entire year. And so that was one area really working through to make sure we could take care of their needs, because there are different needs, and being on the computer wasn't going to satisfy a lot of what they needed. So our staff was great being able to come in and kind of meet them where they were. So that was good. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. In the faculty and staff meeting today, you made a comment about, and I think it was referencing something with professional development, but talking about college being, the tool to get the job. And I was just wondering if you can either contrast or maybe tell me how you balance what I see as that sort of very pragmatic view with, a more, idealistic concept of, developing that lifelong love of money.
Yeah. No, you're right. It was a quick response in terms of, saying that college is the tool to get to that next level. We want to cultivate our students to maximize their strengths and opportunities to be able to get into whatever that college or university is that they choose to, being able to get there and explore to, different career paths and those type of things to have that career. Conversations we have at home, right now, our boys are that, with my daughter, will think of that as far as choosing a school that's going to have a good fit for her, choosing a school where it has that pathway and you can engage in the overall experience, because college is a great experience. And I love the experience of being in college. And it was more than just that tool when you're living it, but that in a sense is, how do we make sure that feeling of experiencing the entire college life is put out there, and what it takes to get in and what it takes to stay in. And it sounds exciting sometimes when we put it out there, but we need to make sure students are prepared to stay. And I think that's where equipping them with those skills to be there, so they'll maximize that opportunity. So good. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm glad you brought it up because it was a little quick.
Go ahead, Anping.
When I asked the question, talking about the increasingly diversified student population, you are right to point out this diversity is not only national, racial. There's also other culture. We will add the neurodiversities and other diversities.
Mhm.
So, but the second part of questions, how to sustain,
Mhm.
how to keep this legacy of educational excellence. As you probably heard, that there's some concern in community
Mhm.
saying that this legacy or this luster of educational excellence has been weakened a little bit. You know, that's a perception. So I'd like to hear your comment on that.
Thank you. Our students, our Newton students, are the best commercial for that. Those students who have graduated, are successful, and they're going through, they are who we put out front to share. This is who we are. This is what we do. When I mentioned before about our unique competitive advantage, I know the other schools that exist in Newton that are not part of the public school system. So if we think about this as a competitive edge, again, what is our unique competitive advantage? And that is the diversity, it's the commitment to education. But we all, as adults, can say anything. I can, superintendent, I'm supposed to say all the right things, but it's our students. I was asked that question before in a previous role when I got to Randolph, and a student asked, well, how are you going to change the perception of our schools? And we were in an AP, I remember we were in an AP language class, and I said to her, I said, you're the best commercial for the district. I mean, she was a tremendous student. I mean, I knew that from just a couple things and and then seeing where she went on after, she proved what we believed was true, was accurate about how she was able to become successful later. But understanding that you have that role. It's not to put anything on the student and say, hell, I need you to do it. But that is what we have to do, is really show these are the students that come through the system. You're questioning, but these are the students that are still coming through the system. And then again, articulating to make people understand that, no, we're not doing these other things. So in parallel, be able to show and tell that. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. So I'm going to follow up a little bit on some comments you made about the budget, or your experience building budgets in times of financial strain. I want you to kind of forget about all that. I want you to imagine that you were allotted an additional 3%, 5%, name your number, whatever that is. And think about, in your current district, how would you use those funds? What would you do that you can't do, but you wished you could?
It's a great question. So the first thing, or what we're already doing, is we have conversations with our principals. We have discussions about, I tell them there's no such thing as a wish list. I want to know what you need. And because there's confusion sometimes where they put something on a wish list, but it's an essential. So no, you should have that. That's not a wish to have. Those are things that you need. And so first having those conversations to see what exactly are we doing. So we talk about outdoor learning spaces. Some schools are set up better than others just because of their proximity in the city. Thinking of within the building, how are we carving out other spaces? Some of them called learning cottages or pods, where they're able to have these, smaller meetings and being able to do some of those other things. Carving out spaces that we could not otherwise use just because the building is old, and being able to make it more usable for students and staff to have access, or whether it's just a small space for an office or those type of things. So those are a couple of things in terms of ensuring that we're having that direct conversation with principals. But then on a larger scope, for us, right now it would be investing in the buildings and in the facilities. There are a few schools that are very, very old, and working with MSBA, there's still a contribution from the city that has to take place. So sometimes that 5% may not be enough. So as we look at what we need to do, so from a realistic standpoint, it's okay, talking to the principals, seeing what they need, but also staff wraps up in there too. But again, seeing from a staffing perspective, what is it that we need? What are it's not so much about FTEs, but what are the services that we need to supply? And if we're able to do more mental health services, if we're able to add more counselors, and not just counselor in terms of just saying, hey, we have counselors, but what's the role they're going to play? When we look at, there are, again, we can talk about all the different mental health strategies and all those other things, but we're bringing individuals in, but are we providing them with the the easy word is professional development. That would be the largest piece, because I look at most school budgets, school system budgets, professional development is one of the smaller areas in terms of investment. So we pay 86 to 87% of our budget on compensation for staff, but then we only pay maybe 3 to 4% to support them professional development wise in many, many districts. So that's been a priority of mine, just in terms of making sure we raise, not saying we need to raise the percent just to raise it, it's invest more in professional development. Don't bring in outside programs when we have people within that have great minds and ideas and thoughts that we can cultivate and have them deliver those programs to our students. So I guess that would be those two pieces: the facility piece, making sure principals are on board and in line, and then for professional development, really investing in our people, where we talk about retention. That's going to help them stay. Their working conditions are going to be better.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Emily?
What is your philosophy around collective bargaining?
My philosophy on collective bargaining has to be a partnership. First of all, we develop a partnership before we have to get into negotiations. I view our union leaders as our partners in the school system. We need to have conversations and plan for the future, whether it has anything to do with the contract. My objective is, as superintendent, technically I'm like, okay, it's my staff. I'm going to do right by them. I'm going to make sure that we're working together and they get what they need. From the union's perspective, the staff, it's their members. And I get that. We have to understand what our different roles are in that process. Once we get that, that helps us work together. Doesn't mean we're going to get to an end and be like, oh yes, everything's great. And we're still going to have some challenging conversations along the way, but we have those relationships to be able to work a lot of that out before we have to get into a negotiation. And I know there's different styles of negotiations and those type of things, but the ones we've typically been involved in will be just the basic negotiation, where you're looking at compensation is always the area that ends up being I have to say, sometimes most contentious. But I believe in building those relationships ahead of time. It doesn't have to be contentious, because a contract has so much in there that's a benefit to everyone. And the money piece is it's extremely important. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm not saying that, but I'm also saying the other components in there deserve a lot of attention. And I think if we can have a better sense, a stronger dialogue around the other pieces that are very important, sometimes it makes the money conversation a little bit easier, because we've done that. We value some other pieces that are in there. It makes the ask, we work together to try to meet the ask, because we realize what else has been put in there. So for example, in New Bedford a couple of years ago with our teachers union, we built in time for parent-teacher conferences, which hadn't been in there before. So that's an area that we're able to get. We also built in other time in terms of time in the morning for principals to be able to meet with their staff for planning time. And we have different terminology for it, but they have that time in the morning to be able to do that. But we worked that out in the contract. Now, did we agree to the first ask for the salary? No, we had to work through that. But we were able to get some of those other things, which I view are extremely important as a principal, to make sure they're able to better lead their building. But then for our teachers and other staff to really come together and have that time and space to co-plan, participate in other professional development activities during the day. Good, thank you.
Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Tamika. I'd like to go back to the question I asked before and explain the impetus for the question, which was that the surveys and focus groups conducted by our consultants seem to suggest that there is not currently in Newton a broadly shared and clearly articulated commitment towards both equity and excellence. And the question I want to press you just a little bit to ask you how you would deal with that sense of division in the community, or lack of consensus in the community, or is it something we don't need to worry about and we just go on? But if you think it is something we need to worry about, how would you go about trying to help the community reach that consensus.
No, I'm glad you brought it back. It's a very good, it's a very good point in terms of if, I had on one of those slides about public sentiment, and if we don't listen, then how are we going to be able to move forward? So my belief is I'd have the opportunity to review those surveys and see exactly where the difference of opinions might be, or the different perspectives. So that would be one, but then open up and have those I've done these meetings before over the course of the year. So for example, a strategic plan sessions, we conducted, again, 4 to 5 sessions over the course of the year, had several community members, parents involved in that process. I would like to see maybe bringing a smaller group together and really dig deeper into it so we can get a clear understanding of, so what are we missing? Where's I'm not going to say the misunderstanding. I'm not going to say it's the receiver's fault for not interpreting it. I want to say from the articulation standpoint, as superintendent, how can we better articulate that message? What evidence do we need to be able to share? When I mentioned about students being the best commercial and the outcomes that they have, how can we best leverage our students to show that what people may be thinking, maybe it's happening. So maybe we need to look at and see, okay, well, what's making people think that it is? What are we missing? And so what it would do is have that open dialogue again and really give it the time or space. And we learn in that process, if there is something that we are doing, there's an unintended consequence, or we're just not communicating effectively about what's really in place. So that would be my answer in terms of re-engaging in that discussion, taking it seriously. And because it's a very important point. And it's not to say that it shouldn't be minimized. I think that we take that time and space because the investors in our community are our parents. They send us their children. We want to make sure that before they make a choice, when I said that unique competitive advantage, I don't want them thinking that, X school down the street out of the system can do what we can't do, when that's really not the case. So I would handle it both of those ways: review all the information, re-engage in the discussion to ensure that we're clearly understanding what the perception is, and then convene this group to see, hey, let's work this out and let's really come up with what we believe. What should our answer be in terms of how do we define excellence? How do we define what equity? We can define it, but how does it relate, and how do what's our working definition within Newton Public Schools?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Go ahead, Co. Or actually, Kathy, and then Co. Apologies.
You talked a little bit about pandemic recovery. And I think one of the things we've heard again and again from our educators is not only the academic side of things we need to recover from, but that they are seeing a dramatic increase in students' social and emotional needs and mental health needs. And so what I'm curious about is what you've done in your current district to sort of address some of those issues, and what you would expect to do here to support the social, emotional, and mental health needs of students.
Good, thank you. From a staffing perspective, what we've been able to do is continue to, vetted nurses to all of our buildings. We have an increase in counselors in our schools. We are created a student services department on its own versus it being part of the special education department. So in that area, more of a focus on our wraparound services. So you have a team that works with our individual schools to really dig a little bit deeper on just some of the obvious factors like attendance. Students are not coming because of what reasons. We've done surveys with students to see when they're at school, what are they actually thinking about? And so that was an interesting, when we were discussing it the other day, I was like, that is an interesting point. So if you're at school and you're worrying about your family because of impacts of COVID, illness-wise or financial, you're not going to be here and now, which creates more emotional stress. Working with our teachers so that way they can better identify things that are happening in class, not to have to address all of it on their own. That's where they're able to identify it and share it with the principal, the counselor, other staff in the building who can help them be a better support and ally to that student. And there are other areas in terms of from, curricular wise, I think I mentioned, I may have mentioned tonight, but because we have experts in the room. Sometimes they don't realize that they're an expert at identifying signs in a student who may be struggling. So it's really having those, I keep saying having those discussions, but that's really what it is bringing it out, shining a light on it and saying, well, you've already identified some of those challenges that you're having or what you've recognized in some of our students. So let's have that conversation. What are the steps we're going to do? Connecting students with mental health services, connecting them with, reaching out to the parents, because if we're not partnering with the parent in those situations, we're not going to make any ground with our students especially when they go home. So I think those are a couple of things that we've definitely been doing, and honestly, trying not to do too much. Really getting to that starting point to say, we need to just identify and be able to support. We don't need to bring in several other programs. We need to start right now identifying, because before we weren't paying as much attention. Someone had, a student may have an issue on a particular day and we just rack it up and say, oh, they had a bad day. As opposed to, there were times when we would say, well, what's wrong with you versus what happened to you? And again, it's just changing our thinking, taking a minute to demonstrate some compassion and some concern about who we are as people. And so from that standpoint, when we think of, the pandemic recovery, we're going to be recovering from the pandemic for a while, because the issues we had before the pandemic, we weren't really addressing. So it's just it's exacerbated, and it's making things take a little bit longer because now it's in our face, and we have to make sure that we are addressing it. And also, last point, recognizing that students and staff, they deal with it in different ways. Not everyone wants to shine a light on themselves and put it out there. They're going to work it through some other ways. So also we work with our employee assistance program to make sure that staff are aware, hey, here's something that you can call, here's some things that, if, we know you're dealing with that, because of just demonstrating that I'm a human being and I have conversations with people when we go out. Sometimes they share a little bit more that I don't share with anyone else, but, connect them with our human resources department and say, you need to make sure you touch base with so-and-so. Here's some things. And it may not just be about them. We've had staff that, we lost a staff member a couple of weeks ago. We've had staff who've lost family members. Just, we're large districts. So there's always those other challenges at home. And I think that not just with the pandemic, but just with life in general, we need to ensure that we're addressing those needs for our people. So there are already structures in place. We just need to continue to follow through on using them.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Cove.
I was going to ask about how you go about planning for a strategic plan for the district, for the schools, and how you would go about planning it and how you would go about bringing it down to the school building level.
Okay. Great question. So, excuse me. When I went into New Bedford, again, it'll sound repetitive because we use these same structures sometimes. So decided we needed to redo the strategic plan. There are several nonprofit organizations that we work with. They've created a coalition almost so there's like a board. And so when we have these meetings, there's about, like I said, about 30 of them, but there could end up being maybe 200 people. So I access them for one piece of it. Also getting students, teachers, parents, other community members that aren't part of there to participate in a dialogue. So we did in parallel, we had the one set of meetings with the students, parents, the others, and staff over the course of the year. Took the previous strategic plan, the goals and the objectives, reviewed, make sure, just gave everything. We had a facilitator come in to help with the process. What do we have? Does it make sense? We have this document in place. What are the outcomes? We have numbers on there. We can say 6th grade math is going to increase by X% for students with an IEP. We can write a goal, but do people truly understand that? That's where we get to the school piece. And that's how we definitely had a variety of different staff people in those meetings. So that's what we did as far as going throughout the course of the year, coming up with, again, evaluating what we have, building onto that. Some of the goals may not have needed to change. We ended up adding a goal to it because we had 4, we ended up with 5, and the last one was public pride and confidence. Because the same thing, how do you build the confidence in the school system? Well, if you don't have it as a goal and an objective, it's not going to happen. It can't just be haphazard and just random pieces being able to put in there. So that it sounds kind of basic, but that's what was most helpful, just getting people together, getting those stakeholders in there, not making them feel important. They were important to the process. And then we followed up with them after. And so working with them, but then also with the community organizations, we did a similar activity with them, not as much time, because it was interesting that their perspective is different than the school base and the parents. But it was very important though, because they serve a lot of our students in after school programs and grant writing in terms of summer programming and those type of things. So it's always interesting to see, well, how are we working together with you to support over here, and their perception and perspectives on the schools were different. So we're able to combine all that information and being able to rewrite that plan.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Co. Go ahead, Mayor Fuller.
Talk to us about curriculum and curriculum development. Right now, MPS is figuring out a literacy program for our elementary schools, for example.
Okay.
Talk to us about that.
Good, thank you. So curriculum development, I feel as though we are always evaluating our curriculum. So for example, right now, we are looking into a new science curriculum. And part of that process is my chief academic officer meets with different groups at the building. So teachers, coaches, obviously principals, but seeing what do we have in place, really evaluating that, having a curriculum team to evaluate the current curriculum. We also work with, I believe we call it, I think it's Curate for the state of Massachusetts, where there are approved things on there that we can work with. We do a lot of work with DESE, just in terms of, we use them as a resource to help them do some of the work in terms of evaluating what they've gone through. So we're not out there, we're not just going cold looking at different curriculum and knowing that here's something that they have already approved. So that's one piece of the process, but really being engaged with our staff so they can see it, they know what's going to be coming. Because in my experience, even going back to being an assistant principal, when the system rolled out new curriculum, it wasn't always the curriculum, it was the rollout. Do we include the right people in the conversation so they knew it was coming? Did the teachers know how much professional development lead time did we give them? We can't say, oh, we have two pre-service days, schools are starting in 2 days, here's your new curriculum. That's not going to work. And are we investing to have people come in the summer? Or are we investing to have people come in at the end of this, before the school year is over, to be able to do a lot of that work? But we're not rushing something through, because if we believe it's that important, it has to be well planned out. So that's what we're doing now in terms of how we include those individuals in that conversation going forward. Good, thank you.
So we can go ahead and do another few questions. We'll see how far we get depending on the length of the responses and the length of the questions themselves. So Rajiv, we'll start with you. If you have another question, please feel free to ask it.
I'm actually going to pass for now.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about New Bedford's return to in-person learning? You mentioned special ed, in September 2020, coming back 4 days a week.
Okay.
Kind of, when you return, what were the benchmarks? How you manage that with the community, with the staff?
Okay. Thank you. Yes, let me stay organized. So when schools were out in March, so for those months, we had a lot of dialogue around what's going to happen when the students come back. We were planning for them to come back. We were hopeful that was going to happen. And so we're making plans for the summer. And when I say engaging, so again, that's with our union partners, having all those discussions, and I want to make sure people are clear, that's with our cafeteria, maintenance, and paraprofessionals as well. Because when we realized we weren't coming back and we started distributing Chromebooks to students to make sure we can take care of things, our staff of cafeteria workers and paraprofessionals were the ones that were on the front line being able to help distribute the Chromebooks and those type of things. So that's where that partnership really came into play, having our unions really understand where we were. Getting ready for the summer when we realized we weren't going to be able to do much there, I still had a lot of communication with our school committee, obviously. So there's a lot of dialogue on, well, what should it look like? What's going to be our plan? So when we decided on, I presented a couple hybrid situations. So one was, well, DESE allowed us to have those additional days to do planning before school started, which was tremendous because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do it. So when we think of the target, so that August school committee meeting, I presented I believe it was two formats of, in a sense, two cohorts. So a Monday, Tuesday, and then a Thursday, Friday for the general population of students. We settled on having about 4,000 or so students come in the Monday, Tuesday, and another 4,000 the Thursday, Friday. But then there were another 4,000-ish that were strictly remote. We had already distributed the high school was already one-to-one. They already had their laptops and those type of things. The middle schools, we gave them all out. That helped with the student side of the organization and the logistics. From the city side and working with us, we had probably 4 COVID meetings per week, every week. And in those discussions, we talked about transmission rates. We had city and state officials, and then of course we had DESE as well, where they shared a lot of the information. But specific to New Bedford, we had individuals that were there from the city's health department, from the local hospital, from all of the other health professionals that were around as we talked about what were the transmission rates within the city and what were the age groups. And so as we started the virtual piece of it, they agreed to that part. As you started the virtual piece, it still wasn't decided, it was still being kind of thrown around. Is there a target of positivity rate? What's our positivity rate that we may target to say schools are going to be closed? We stayed away from, I was able to kind of keep us away from that because I kept focusing on, well, the positivity rate in our schools is here. It's much lower, and we have all the PPE. We're doing all those different types of things to make sure students are getting what they need. So from that standpoint, being able to keep them in schools because the positivity rate among that age group, but then having the support of all the medical health professionals, all the others within the city and beyond, really allowed for us to be able to maintain and do that. We worked with our principals about the rules that needed to be in place. I mean, we were fully masked there. We had the distancing in our rooms. One other piece I have to mention, during the summer, we did an evaluation, had an outside evaluator come in to look at all of our buildings. And the one thing I kept saying is that leading up to that is our buildings are certified for occupancy. So we're not talking about air quality, we're talking about air flow. And we put exchange units in the rooms to flow through. And like I said, we have some buildings that are over 100 years old. And once you open up something, it flows through. And so there was a benefit to some of that. And in other ways, there were some challenges. But those are some of with the audit of the buildings, the report didn't come directly to me. When the original report came, it went to committee members, to our unions, and some other individuals so they could see firsthand what it showed, just having that complete level of transparency. So we did that in August leading up to schools being open. So that was how we were able to do it, because we showed we're equipped to do some things. We took advantage of some of the funding that had come through, and we just enacted it and made sure we continued to emphasize that it's not a air quality, but it's air flow. And we're going to keep students at this distance, and having them come in for the different hybrids really was able to work out. And I told parents, you're going to have to do what's in your best interest. We know that this is a very sensitive situation. We know from the health side, we're not going to put students at danger. So the parents who chose to keep students remote for that time, the distance learning, we made sure that they had access, and we worked with our teachers. And it was hard. I mean, it was really hard, but people really came together to kind of understand what we were doing during that time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Ping, before we move on, I just want to I want to apologize and acknowledge that you have a faulty microphone and,
Okay, I thought I could.
the noises are not on you, it's on
Okay.
our tech, so,
All right.
go ahead, Ping.
Looking at your resume, it's very impressive.
Thank
And
you.
you have such a wide experience. And it's amazing. Just quickly, I counted,
Mhm.
5, 6 high school experience in Montgomery, Maryland. And then you became the executive director of the founding principal of the school in Chicago, and then came to district, Columbia District, and then came to Randolph, turnaround district, and then New Bedford. So how do you think those experiences will help you if we decide to hire you as a Newton School District Superintendent?
I appreciate that. I think you have to be a lifelong learner. It's not something you can just say. You have to be able to, I feel as though you live through that process. And obviously New Bedford and Newton are different places. And I know the experiences that I've had there were basically, at this point, a tiny bit bigger. So staff-wise, have about 2,900 staff, 1,100 teachers. We have all the different bargaining units that we've been able to work through successfully. There are challenges. We're working with our paras right now, and we're going to work some things out. But again, just having that secondary experience at the high school level as a principal, having the opportunity to start that school in Chicago from scratch and building in our academic priorities, going into a neighborhood of 4,000 housing units and really getting students to feel welcomed and understood about the experience that we were trying to provide for them. Being in DC really helped understand the K-12 perspective, because being exposed to the elementary schools there and exam entrance schools, School Without Walls, which is basically on GW's campus in Foggy Bottom, was one of my schools where you test in. Another school, Banneker, it still is across the street from Howard University, which is another exam. They don't do the testing, but it's an application school. So look at all of those areas and the level of exposure to how we've been able to support students. And all those schools are supporting students to go on and compete at the highest level. Coming to Massachusetts as superintendent, then learning the other component of being relationships, I think has really allowed me the opportunity to cultivate, be able to navigate what's most important, but also what's most impactful. So looking at a combination of all those areas. And I've been the same person. I've learned more each time, but I'm the same human being. And as my father says, he's like, you don't go out and change just for some circumstance. If you're not going to be who you are and be genuine about things, then why bother doing it? And so those are things that, he's my father, so I have to listen to that part of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ping. I'll skip myself for a minute just to conserve time, and we'll come back to myself and Rajiv at the end if time permitting. Go ahead, Emily.
So the mayor asked my curriculum questions, so I'm also going to pass.
Okay.
Go ahead, Paul.
When it comes to budget cutting time, where do music and the arts fit in your priorities?
When it comes to budget cutting time, we hope we're not at budget cutting time, but
We are.
music and music and art are extremely important. And I'm just saying, okay, they're extremely important, but I started playing the trumpet when I was in 4th grade, and I stopped in middle school because I started playing football. I didn't realize you could do both, but I look at the arts and the level of success. We have about 3 guitars in our house that nobody plays. He thought he wanted to learn it. Then there's a piano that someone tried to play. Then there's a clarinet that my daughter, I tried to persuade her that we can get a new one that's pink if you keep trying it again, but it didn't happen. So the thing is, though, it's very important when we're talking about the overall academic and educational experience. I think that we can tap into students' their other skills, their other talents, and really being able to give them that opportunity to shine. And what I would propose to people, as I played sports since I was 9 years old. I played in college. We're not really going to cut our athletics. So when we have hard conversations, we need to not position ourselves to have to cut in the arts either. It's hard, I get that, and we have to look to see something may have to give, but those are conversations that would have to take place. But as superintendent, that's not going to be the first thing that we look at because it's programmatical. As I was in one of the I think it's at the middle school, and we're talking about world language, but world language in my mind is just as important as the other. I taught high school English, so we're thinking, okay, that's a core, but world language is a core. When we think of our electives and the level of importance that they have, we need to make sure our students are being more exposed to the arts, whether it's music in terms of instrumental or choral. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Go ahead, Kathy.
Mr. Anderson, you talked a lot about how you support principals, and we are fortunate, given the size and scope of our district, to have a very accomplished central administration staff, with a bunch of assistant superintendents who are sort of direct supervisors of principals. So how, as superintendent, do you see your role in working with the central administration staff who then sort of work directly with principals?
So the same way you build those relationships with, I say principals because you walk in, I go by myself. We walk and we talk and they share things that they need to share. And I figure out how I need to relay that back to the central office team. So for that central office team, when I mentioned earlier about us having a meeting and I'm an agenda, that's not always the case. I'm not always the agenda item. Sometimes I have to run the meeting, but we have that where we're cultivating and understanding, again, and we start using the word most impactful versus important to see in your department, what is the value add or the added value to the classroom? And so, for example, if we're looking at there's a couple obvious ones, but I'll think of, we'll just say the finance office. So it's not just about saying if we have enough money, I need our finance team, when we have these conversations, to press and push back on certain funding requests that are coming in. So whether it's a new program, whether it's a different type of professional development, it doesn't mean I'm not expecting them to be the expert on knowing what it is, because they're supposed to talk to the academic people. They're supposed to talk to the chief academic officer and others who supervise the principals directly to get a better sense of what that is. So really having a team that pushes back on one another in a respectful way. I believe there has to be a level of respect. We have to have that level of openness. So when we have our meetings, we're all real people. And I always say that we're real people. I'm not asking a question. It's not rhetorical. And when we're asking questions, we need to have the answers. We need to dig a little bit deeper. When I have on the entry plan about having an analysis and reports, those are areas that weren't as robust before. And so that's something we've evolved to really build, to say, you can't just give a verbal, I need to see what's on paper. And I think we are doing a much better job in holding each other accountable for that. So the relationships were there, but now it's, okay, how are we really pushing on one another? I know we get along. I know we have the students' best interests at heart. We understand what's happening in the buildings, but how are we working with one another to make sure we're all coming together, locked in arms, to say, okay, I understand this. This is what we're going to do from that, from the chief academic officer's world, from a curriculum side, to make sure we have the right amount of staff. That's the other question, especially right now that's coming through. We're doing curriculum, but do we have the appropriate content leaders? So we're missing a science person. It's been a little bit of a struggle. So we have our ELA, we have our math, and so they're part of those conversations too, to give their expert opinion on what's there, on the direction that we need to go to make sure everything is covered. And it's the whole thing about not leaving anything to chance.
Thanks, Kathy. Go ahead, Cove.
I'll pass because I know we're getting close on time and I want him to have a chance to ask questions as well.
And Mayor Fuller?
Is there anything that you'd love to bring up that we've forgotten to ask you? And you can take a pass.
I'll take a pass. Thank you.
All right. Rajiv, did you have one? Because I do.
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I think it'll be relatively brief. I'd love to hear an example of when you used data to come up with a decision around academics and deciding, it could be curriculum, it could be additional support or interventions, but how did you go from looking at the data to coming up with a decision?
Good. One quick example would be we look at benchmark. So from the previous year, looking at end of year, so it could be MCAS data, but then also comparing that to benchmark assessment data. So we do it 3 times a year where there's beginning, middle, and end. Identifying those students where, so for example, we have this meeting called an Achievement Steering Committee meeting, where every 6 weeks, certain schools report out on their progress on select indicators. Those indicators could be formative assessment, summative, also looking at the benchmark if the data is available at that time. So a recent one, we had beginning of year, middle of the year, and then the other areas. It's disaggregated by all students. We're looking at those indicators in addition to what other factors may contribute, like attendance. Is there an attendance issue? Is there a issue with behavior? Identifying those students that fit into a certain category to say, okay, there's some additional supports needed. So there may be things where they're having to come after school. One of the middle schools do it where the students come after school for a program, or they do pull out during the day, or a little bit of push in. So somebody may go into a math class and ensure that they're getting a complete understanding of what's going on curricular wise. We also use it for when we added some interventionist positions. So talking to principals to see, okay, here's the data, here are the needs. How can we help with those needs during the day? It was beyond the scope of what teachers, that capacity just weren't able to do it time-wise. So from a staffing point, we were able to add those positions as part of ESSER, but those positions have to be incorporated into the allocated budget, or some of them are terminal, but we're using data to determine which of the positions we do continue to keep and what's the impact they've been actually having on student performance. Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajiv. Actually, I should have gone before you. That was my question. It was building on Mayor Fuller's question about the financial challenges. Okay. And you paraphrasing you said that you have to look at the data to determine if a program is really worthy or of continued investment, continued funding. So my question, I'll ask it slightly different. Okay. What points of data do you habitually look at to assess student performance? I spoke to some of them, but just kind of a general overview.
I'll go back when I was a principal in Maryland, the county would have about 50 different data points. So we narrowed it down. From a high school, we're looking at graduation rates, ninth grade pass rates, enrollment in honors level classes, enrollment in AP classes, attendance, suspension information, and I know there's a couple other state tests data that we would look at. So right now we use pretty much the same data points. It's the same data in every school everywhere. It's just a matter of what do you do with it and what does it mean? Some schools are not, their graduation rate is a data point, but it's not going to be an issue because it's at 95%. But so looking at if your graduation rate is lower, where are we in terms of what are the indicators impacting graduation? So ninth grade pass rate is going to be a clear indicator of graduation maybe off. The enrollment in higher level courses. So as part of the accountability system for Massachusetts, one of the measures is advanced course completion. And so how many of our students are being exposed to a higher level curriculum, I guess we could say, early on, but not early on, but by 11th and 12th grade, that piece factors in there. So those are all the data points that we look at. In addition to the schools have their own specific ones that will include in there specifically to some of the things that they need to do. But from a central perspective, those are some of the main ones we know that if we're able to move those points in the right direction, it's going to move the school and it's going to move the entire system.
Great.
Thank you
very much. So at this point in the meeting, Mr. Anderson, you have been very diligent in responding to our many, many questions. And we would like to reciprocate and offer you an opportunity to ask this committee any questions that you have for us.
I guess the first question would be define what excellence and equity means to the committee.
All right, that is a very good question. And we'll zip around the room. What does excellence and equity mean to you? Because I think what we'll see is there's a little overlap, but somewhat probably some differences as well. One or two sentences, please. Rajiv, if you would start.
Okay. For me, excellence means that every student across the full range of capabilities is challenged to his or her ability level. So excellence for special education students, excellence for our highest achievers, excellence for students who need supports in whatever way they might need support.
Okay.
For equity, to me, it's about opportunity. Not all students are necessarily going to grab that opportunity and make the most out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the very least, the ability to achieve excellence has to be available to all students.
Thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, so, I think we often talk about the concept of equity here is giving each student what they need.
Okay.
And, when I think about the concept of excellence, it's really, a student maximizing their capacity. And, I've kind of recently become fond of saying, you can't achieve excellence without equity.
Mm.
But you can have equity without excellence. And so you can't pursue equity for the sake of equity. You pursue equity for the sake of excellence.
Got it. Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Ping?
It's challenging. I admit that. And we used to say Newton was well known for the educational excellence or academic excellence, to be more exact. Currently, we have the equity for past few years. And I've been debating with myself how to understand that. But high standards, very important. And then we give students support to meet their, potential and provide the opportunities. I think you eloquently said quite a few things which I like to hear, to give them access opportunities, so to help them to meet their high standards. And I think that's very critical now, since our society, the world economy and technology, all things changing. We need to see students get the post-secondary education. That's very critical. If they failed high school, we failed our duties. And so that's so critical now.
Thank you.
Emily?
So in terms of excellence, I actually have the same definition that Rajiv has. I probably would have said it almost exactly the same way. In terms of equity, I'm going to second what was said about access. I think without access, there is no equity. It needs, students don't get what they need. And I think I would also put on top of that the importance of personalized education to ensure that students have access. So that way they can have academic excellence as well.
Thank you.
Whatever that looks like for them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you. I think Rajiv and Chris really summarized how I would feel about it, but I also want to suggest there's another side to this, which is that I don't think the pursuit of equity requires identification by race or other characteristics of people as oppressors or being oppressed. That's a political agenda that should be separate from the Newton Public Schools curriculum.
Good. Thank you.
Kathy?
So in terms of excellence, I agree very much with what Rajiv and Emily said. I think I would layer on to that definition a recognition that excellence is a very broad concept, and it's not purely academic, but it involves the arts and athletic endeavors and our career and tech ed programs, because not every one of our graduates is going to go to college or has the same purely academic mindset. So we're serving a broad cross-section of students, and excellence for them is really providing them the tools and the training and the support to do whatever it is they want to do after high school.
Okay.
And then I think on the equity side of things, I think access is important. I think there's also a sense of belonging component to it as well, such that all of our students feel heard and included and valued.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, I think about this a lot. But I think that I would, as a definition, I'd go with what Rajiv said. When you go eighth, you have to, you have to think of something new if you're going to say the same thing. But really, truly, what I think about both those topics is that it's important to constantly press on what people mean by these things. I don't subscribe to the idea that excellence is only AP classes. For example, I personally think that, critical thinking, looking for other skills in students. AP classes may be a metric that people use, but really, if I was looking for my own child, I would want to see them engage deeply in topics with critical thinking, with other things. So I think, and the same thing with equity. I work in education and I hear a lot of great talk about equity. I also hear people using equity as reasons to not differentiate in some cases in classes. And I think it's just constantly continuing the discussion and pressing on the ideas. I think it's easy to come up with a definition, but I think like that definition is evolving in our field, and it's important to just keep pressing on what people mean. What does that look like? What is our data on that? So that's my definition, I guess.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mayor Fuller.
Love the question, because I think that's important for us as a community, a school committee, and with our future superintendent to get more clarity about what it means. And you can hear it around the table. Lots of great things have been said. So I lift up what you've said. One of the, I think, trickiest part for us is Rajiv's excellent definition at the beginning involved the word challenge. And I think what we are finding challenging is the right, we had a cluster of suicides in our high schools a number of years ago, and I think we as a community are still grappling with what challenge means for our young people, and finding the right way to provide rigor in a supportive way is, I think, still a work in progress for us, so that ability and potential and rigor and excellence and access and support. I do like Emily's words of how do we actually fulfill the promise of personalized education is really hard for our teachers, and they're trying mightily, but it's really hard.
Thank you.
And I'll close it out with my own definition of equity and excellence, which is to say that they are one and the same, one thing. Equity and excellence, it's unseverable, and it is intertwined in a way that I think most people don't recognize, or at least don't admit that they recognize. And I fundamentally reject the notion that we as parents who send our children to this wonderful schools don't have the exact same needs. We want our kids to be high functioning learners, highly achieving learners. And we send them here because we hope and expect and demand that they will have just that. And another level on top of that is I fully expect that our schools, this is the equity piece, will look at someone who looks like my children and give them what they need. They'll look at someone who looks different from my children and give that child exactly what they need. And I reject the idea that that is a political construct. It's simply a construct of the fact that we exist in this building and our children go to school with people who are the same or different from them, and they have to be able to learn and thrive. And these are the things, both excellence and equity, that are going to get them to that place. So I appreciate your question. I think it was a very good question. I appreciate my colleagues for their different and unique perspectives on that take. And with that, we have come to the conclusion of your interview. Mr. Anderson, so on behalf of the Newton School Committee, thank you so much once again for your interest in becoming Newton's next superintendent. On behalf of our faculty and our staff, our parents and our guardians, our students and our residents, many of whom you met today, thank you for spending the entire day in Newton. We know it was exhausting and hopefully a little bit fun.
Yeah.
And that you got to see what makes this place so wonderful to be in. We deeply appreciate your generosity with your time. And for your knowledge, we'll be convening tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock to make our final decision. Our search consultants will follow up with you. Thank you again to our staff who assisted throughout today, throughout yesterday. They helped to plan and orchestrate 2 wonderful visits. Thank you to everyone who attended tonight's in-person meeting, in-person interview. It's been a real pleasure having you here joining us, Mr. Anderson. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And our meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Record.